I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. This is week
3 of Billy Wilder month.
Billy Wilder theme month. And for this week's selection, Nate again is curating for me. I guess you can take it from here.
Yeah. So Rob did not know what he was seeing until around 7 minutes before we started watching the film. So we watched the 1957 movie The Spirit of St. Louis, which is, of course, the true story of Charles Lindbergh's May 20th through May 21st, 1927, first solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean, based on his memoirs. It is a screenplay written by Wilder and a man named Wendell Mays. I just want to briefly go over this impressive list of writing or co-writing accomplishments. So he started with Spirit of St. Louis, and would then go on to do Anatomy of a Murder, another Jimmy Stewart film, 2 years later, North to Alaska, Advise and Consent, the Otto Preminger political drama, Von Ryan's Express, which we watched, I think, pre-recording days, which is World War II Frank Sinatra film, In Harm's Way, another Preminger, The Poseidon Adventure, an absolute classic, and then Death Wish, the Charles Bronson vehicle. So he had a long career. This was his only writing project with Wilder, and of course they were adapting memoirs from Charles Lindbergh. It's quite the film. Let's get your first impressions.
I was really impressed with how captivating this film was. It maintained a great sense of tension throughout the entire film. I mean, this film was made in 1957, and I repeatedly found myself engaging and leaning forward in anticipation and no, don't do that.
Yeah, it's got a great energy to it. And the film has a little bit of a challenge, which is this is a story about a man alone in a plane for 33 hours. How do you make that kinetic? How do you make that interesting? Well, you start by not getting him onto the plane until an hour into the movie.
Yeah.
So the rest of it is him getting ready to go on the plane and then flashbacks. And then you continue those flashbacks to have interruptions in the action on the plane so it doesn't get too sterile. So you have more movement to it. And then you carry that through until the end, and you punctuate that with some spectacular visuals. And the way it captures the energy of 1927 and of that original flight, it feels very vicarious. This was a role that Jimmy Stewart fought for. He loved Charles Lindbergh. When he was about 18 is when the flight happened, and he recalled keeping up with the news, and every time there was an update, he had a map and he would plot where Lindbergh was. So since he was a young man, he wanted to play this part. Charles Lindbergh was 25 when he made this flight across the Atlantic. Jimmy Stewart was 48 when he played him in this film, and it still works.
I actually made a note. I actually wrote it down in my notes that Jimmy Stewart, especially at the beginning of this film, looks awfully young, and I'm not sure I've seen Jimmy Stewart look younger in a film that I've watched.
Well, he's got that aw shucks thing that makes him
Well, he looks
young.
A little bit older as the film progresses, but those first opening shots, he looks really young, and part of it's the hair.
Yeah.
That lighter colored hair and whatnot, but yeah, it worked.
And the film, film looks beautiful. It is a CinemaScope film. It is in Warner color. It's very rich. One of the comments that I made to you before we started watching this, shortly after I let you know what movie we were going to be watching, is that this, if you were watching this movie and you knew nothing about the people behind the scenes, could you ever guess that Billy Wilder had directed this film?
I don't think so.
This is the least Billy Wilder-like Billy Wilder movie.
Yeah.
It has none of his signature touches in it. There's some humor, and Wilder was known for his humor, so there's that. But beyond that, it's not a theme that he explores in other films.
Maybe in the music a little.
The cast is different than a typical Wilder cast. This is a historical fiction biographical film. He didn't do any other films like that. And it makes me kind of fascinated that this, like Jimmy Stewart, this was a project that he felt passionate about and wanted to do. Of course, Wilder was Jewish, and there is an association of Charles Lindbergh with anti-Semitism. There's arguments about how anti-Semitic he really was. But it's a weird choice for Wilder to do this film, but it's great. What it makes me think of is Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which was the screwball comedy Alfred Hitchcock directed, just to be like, I want to show that I can do this. And Billy Wilder shows he could have made epic films like this throughout his career if he wanted to. Though this film, I'm going to skip around in order a little bit, was a box office disappointment.
Was it really?
It was a flop. And not like a tiny flop, like a giant flop.
That's surprising.
$7 million to make, $2.7 million box office. Lost a
This
ton
is
of
well
money.
regarded as a classic, right?
In hindsight, it is, but it did not do well at the box office, and it got mediocre reviews.
Wow.
Which you'd think that there was such a timeless quality to this. You'd think it would resonate at the time, but apparently it didn't. Now, one critic who liked the film was Bosley Crowther, who was the longtime lead critic for the New York Times. And while he liked the film, one thing he did say about it, that he was a little disappointed in that you don't feel like you really know Charles Lindbergh from this film. That Jimmy Stewart is playing a type. He's playing Jimmy Stewart more than he's playing Charles Lindbergh. And this film is not really an exploration of who these people were. It's a film about the mechanics of how they did what they did.
Yeah.
Which I think is perfectly fine. And I think it's actually more interesting than you would think it would be. Like, this movie feels like it could do what Flying the Plane for 3 days did to Lindbergh, which is he's fallen asleep.
Yeah.
It didn't make me want to fall asleep.
No.
I thought it was really engaging.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was engaging throughout. Like I said, the tempo, the tension that it maintains throughout. Like I said, from a 1957 film being watched in 2021, I was impressed by the tension throughout.
And also the sense of time. So this is 30 years after Lindbergh. It's amazing how much the world had changed from 1927 to 1957.
Yeah.
Like from 1991 to 2021, there's been a lot of change, but not on that scale. I mean, you've had cross-Atlantic, cross-Pacific flights were common.
Yeah.
30 years after they were completely unheard of. And you do get mentions of the other people that tried and failed to make that crossing, including those two Frenchmen who disappeared.
Yeah.
And it might be interesting to look to see if they ever did find out what happened to them. But Lindbergh really kind of came in just under the radar. There was a lot of people actively trying to fly both ways across the Atlantic and claim this prize. He made it very well might not have.
Yeah, especially given the circumstances and some of the other things that occurred on the flight, the icing, the sleep deprivation, all of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it all was working against him. So,
and he's also kind of Lindbergh's an interesting man, and he was billed as this kind of hick male pilot from the sticks, when he was the son of a 5-term congressman.
Yeah.
Michigan born, Minnesota raised, isolationist Republican congressman father, opposed entry into the First World War. Lindbergh would carry many of his political views throughout his life. They're more controversial now than they were then.
Yeah.
But definitely an interesting figure, worthy of independent study. We should talk about some of the flashback and the different sequences in this film. One that's not a flashback, but it's one that I was thinking about as we watched it. There's the little fly that gets on the plane as they're leaving New York and doesn't get off the plane until they're at St. John's, Newfoundland. He flies out, and Stewart has conversations with him. In fact, Stewart doesn't say very many words. Like, he doesn't talk very many words in this movie. He narrates most of this movie in his head. Yeah. I think there's a period of about an hour between when he tells, oh, I guess I might as well go, to when he is yelling at the fuel tank that you got to switch tanks.
Yeah.
And he hasn't said a word with his mouth on screen in about an hour. But that fly that gets on the plane and gets out in Newfoundland, I was thinking, I'm assuming that this is real. I'm assuming this isn't something they made up. This is something that comes from the memoirs. It feels true. That fly would have traveled a greater distance than any other fly in the history of the world up until that point. Would have traveled more space in a shorter period of time than any fly ever.
Yeah.
pioneer of a fly.
I wonder if they've answered the question of if a fly flying inside of an airplane adds any weight to the plane.
Do you add any weight?
Yeah.
He does a lot of math problems to keep himself awake. Oh, how many? So you're going to get my crappy Jimmy Stewart impression on this particular podcast. But he's talking about how many the cylinders igniting, and he's got 8 cylinders, and they do it so many times. And he's just doing these things to keep himself awake.
There's got to be 10 million little explosions before I reach Paris.
How the Spirit of St. Louis got its name was kind of neat. It was kind of a
Is that accurate?
As far as I know, yeah, it was meant to promote the town because his investors were St. Louis based.
Yeah.
At least as depicted in this film, very loyal to him. To the point even that they got kind of nervous for him, not just because it would be embarrassing if the plane didn't make it or if he died, but they really liked him. And they didn't want to see him die needlessly.
Yeah.
And they're like, you sure you don't need more sleep? We can put this off for a day. But I think just the energy of it, I don't think he could have slept before,
taking the journey.
Taking that journey. It was just too much for him. So there's the flashbacks of him buying the plane.
In Georgia.
Where
he trades his Harley Davidson towards the plane.
And how he has to make several rounds. Like, he'd never actually flown before.
Yeah.
It's like, well, who taught you to fly? Well, I had this flight instructor. I was his best student. Of course, I was his only student. And he wouldn't actually let me fly.
Solo, yeah. Well, but even prior to that, in the chronology of the film, he crashes the mail plane and he ends up on the train.
Yeah.
With the mail.
With the suspenders guy.
Yeah. The conversation on the train with the suspender salesman, I really enjoyed that part. That was good.
It's a great little character. That's kind of Wilder-esque. The sequence where he's flying the mail plane. He doesn't get word that the conditions are too bad to fly to Chicago, so he goes off.
Yeah.
And eventually he has to parachute out, and they have this effect. It's a very period effect shot of Lindbergh's on his parachute, and the plane is kind of caught in a loop, and it almost hits the parachute a couple times before it crashes. And it was just really low tech, but man, I recoiled every time the plane got close to the parachute. It's like, no.
Yeah, it was really
quite effective.
Yeah. Well, and then shortly after that was one of my favorite scenes where he goes to the airfield, to the little restaurant at the airfield, and he goes in and he uses their phone to call, I forget the name of the airplane manufacturer, but he's calling a plane manufacturer in New York to get a quote on a price for a plane. And he asks the proprietor of the restaurant to turn off the radio, and the proprietor turns to the cook and says, "Shut your face, he's talking long distance," because the guy was singing or whistling, something like that, and I like that part.
Goes to New York and is turned down by Mel from the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Well, but he's not actually turned down. They want to put conditions on the sale,
they don't want
which
him
includes having someone else be the pilot.
So he goes off to California to a different company that
before we get to that, what did you think of his money belt?
The money belt doesn't stick out to me.
You remember, so he arrives in New York and he undoes the buttons on his vest and he pulls the cashier's check out of that money belt across his belly. I thought that was fun. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so he gets back in San Diego, and he gets off the train, and basically the bank reps promptly just hand him a ticket and put him on the train back to San Diego,
where he encounters one of the heads of the company cooking sand dabs, a California fish with propane butane torch, acetylene torch, and the other boss comes down and they're talking to this guy. They don't know what he's there for, and then eventually he reveals, "I'm the big wig from Missouri."
Yeah, when's the big wig from St. Louis getting here?
That's me.
Blah blah blah, and this and that and the other. Who are you? I'm the big wig from St. Louis. Yeah. And
the one guy's like, "Dang it, Charlie! Why'd you're cooking fish with
the torch? You got him cooking."
And, it was a real passion project for them. They had 90 days. They put the thing together in 1963.
Yeah.
From the original sketch to a viable plane. And then, again, they just missed those Frenchmen that disappeared. If they had made it, nobody would know who Charles Lindbergh was.
Yeah.
And the French would be even cockier.
Oh, what did you make of Jimmy Stewart teaching the priest to fly in that one flashback?
That one I kind of have some doubts that is real.
Yeah.
But
It was entertaining.
It was entertaining. They got some characters. Murray Hamilton is third billed in this movie. I think he has one scene.
Yeah.
Where he meets him. They're in a flying circus together. And the flying circus scene, that scene made me nervous.
I had seen the flying circus scene before, but that's the only scene of this movie that I think I've previously seen.
The acrobats on the side of the wings, and then when they parachute out, and they have multiple parachutes.
Yeah.
One after another, and it's like, if one of those parachutes doesn't go, how
then they just switch to the next one.
But yeah, that was kind of nerve-wracking. You really get a sense of the novelty of it. Like, It really makes that fresh, and that's one of the strongest things about this film, as well as the visuals. I love the crowd sequence at the end, where he's confused because he hasn't slept for so long.
Even before that, and this is also on our screen right now, but when he's in New York getting ready to take off, and they're just mounted that compass, and they're looking for a mirror to mount, and he calls out, and this little girl, or this not little girl, this gal from Philadelphia, I believe she said she was from, had been standing in the rain all night just to watch him, have the glimpse of him possibly taking off. Of course, she gets a up close and personal tour of the plane. Yeah. And in this movie, that person is Patricia Smith, and her credited role is Mirror Girl.
Mirror Girl. Patricia Smith, who was mostly a television actress, had a long career.
Yeah.
Over 40, 50 years.
But I felt like that was effective to drive home just how unique this was. Like, people came from long distances just to have a glimpse of him getting ready to take off.
And when, it's been raining, there's some questions about the conditions, but he's like, I want to go ahead, might as well do this. And they have to push the plane out of the mud. And you have the crowds of people following just after the plane. And I love the energy of that.
Yeah.
And when he's getting ready to go, and he looks out one window and everything's fine, looks out the other window, he can see the ambulance taking a position.
At the end of the runway.
At the end of the runway, it's like, this may not go well. And it's like,
Yeah. Well, and then shortly after he takes off, his accounting of his various naps in the past, places that he slept, that was kind of an entertaining scene.
Oh, yeah, where he slept on the railroad tracks. And
they
have the flashback, you think this kid's going to get hit, but no, he knows exactly where to put his head.
Yeah.
The train don't get him.
Well.
But yeah, and the crowd scene at the end, where he lands in Paris, and he's confused by the lights because he's so sleep deprived, and you can kind of see that there's crowds of people, but it doesn't register at first that these are crowds of people, and it's like, oh, this is for me.
Some of that would have been kind of terrifying. I mean, they literally just pull him out of the plane and carry him away from his plane.
And, he had no radio on the plane, so basically people that spotted him along the way got the word down the line.
Yeah.
So that there was huge 200,000 people there waiting for his arrival, and he had no idea how well publicized what he had done had become.
Yeah.
And then he talks about how there was 4 million in New York when he came back. I mean, this you can't think there's no equivalent to that today.
Yeah.
To this kind of this type of stardom and heroism. There'll never be anything like this again.
I would like to think that the space race is a parallel, and even some
of the stuff,
parallel. Mm-hmm. And even some of the stuff that's happening nowadays with some of the private rockets, and I'm not talking like Jeff Bezos and the other guy's name from Virgin Galactic, Branson or whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm talking more like the SpaceX and Boeing, things like that, where we're talking things that are capable of going deeper into space. I mean, we're talking about, before too much longer, there's a possibility that SpaceX is going to be sending private citizens around the moon, So, anyways, there's some parallels there, but it's all on the back of people who did things like this previously. Oh, how about trying to ask the guy on the boat out the window of the plane which way to Ireland?
Well, I mean, if you're a fisherman, you're out in the Atlantic, a plane is coming from the west. You maybe have never even seen a plane in your life, and that there ain't nothing for many hundreds of miles in that direction, and the plane's coming from it. There's no words. You're dumbfounded by it, and that fisherman was very dumbfounded by what he was seeing.
Yeah, this was a great film. It was, like I said, I just keep going back to the same things, just that tension it built, I was caught off guard by the tension that this film achieves throughout the movie.
Yeah, this was, I think, only the second time I've seen it all the way through.
Yeah.
First time would have been around 2004-ish, and then I caught the bulk of it like on a Sunday afternoon or something, and finished it. And this really is kind of the epitome of a weekend afternoon movie.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't really require all of your attention, but it's still gripping, and it's still just, really a great movie to look at, and it's got, a story that resonates. I mean, it really clicks, really hits something about the wonders of what, people can do.
Yeah. Of course, we are accustomed to this having been a Jimmy Stewart role, but apparently, looking at the trivia here on IMDb, evidently that was somewhat controversial. I guess Charles Lindbergh actually wanted Anthony Perkins to play him in the movie,
who would have been a more appropriate choice in terms of age, and even Perkins, I think, looks even more like Stewart looks pretty much like Lindbergh in this, but Perkins would have looked even more like it.
Yeah.
That would have been a curious version to see.
One of the producers, Jack Warner, I guess, was opposed to the casting of Jimmy Stewart, and actually believes that it was the casting of Jimmy Stewart that caused it to flop.
Yeah, arguable.
Well, I guess John Curd turned down the role, and that was when Jimmy Stewart was given the role. But John Curd turned it down because of his disapproval of Lindbergh's pro-Nazi sympathies and racist and anti-Semitic views. Charles Lindbergh apparently didn't like Jimmy Stewart's portrayal. And according to this, Jimmy Stewart was difficult to work with throughout the filming of this movie.
And they attribute that to his maybe realizing he'd been miscast, or which, should have made this film 20 years earlier.
Yeah. Well, and we talked briefly already about how some of Charles Lindbergh's political views became more controversial later on, but you can't erase the accomplishments that he made. I guess in part of the preparation for this film, Billy Wilder actually did some wing walking.
Oh, wow.
Basically to win a bet, a $50 bet, and he won the bet. One of the other producers bet him that he wouldn't walk on a wing, and he did.
And said he gave his winnings from that bet to the American Cancer Society.
I guess Jimmy Stewart later on admitted that he was too old to play the part. Oh, you mentioned this when it was playing, and you wanted to know what this was. Early in the film, Lindbergh is disturbed in his hotel room bed by the song Rio Rita. You wanted to know the name of the song so that you could
play it loudly
playing
in my
it too
apartment.
loud. My note on that was, even back then, they had to deal with loud stereos. But Rio Rita is playing loudly on radio or record player. Lindbergh was on his way to see the Broadway show Rio Rita when he learned that the weather might be good enough the next day for his flight to Paris, and he took off the next morning.
Oh, little in reference.
So,
I thought that. So it says, in Charles Lindbergh's view of Ireland, he flies over Skellig Island. This is the same island featured in Star Wars The Force Awakens when Rey meets Luke for the first time.
yeah.
I was going to make some kind of smart-A joke about he flies to the island and sees Luke.
Yeah. So why didn't you?
Should have made the joke.
Yeah.
Making it now.
So in the movie, the employees of the Ryan Aviation Company sign a nose access panel, including the dog's paw print. But in real life, instead of signing that access panel, and the dog's paw print was not on the panel they signed the inside of the propeller spinner cone. So as it turns out, that spinner developed a fatigue crack during the flight from San Diego to New York, and so a new one was made for the Atlantic crossing. Because the original signed propeller cone didn't make the actual historic flight, it is exhibited in a separate glass case just across from where the legendary airplane proudly hangs in the Smithsonian.
And it's a beautiful replica of the Spirit of St. Louis. It just looks so real. I mean,
Yeah.
So
Well, they used 2 real replicas for the filming, but neither of them is capable of flying. Yeah, I think that's enough of the trivia.
Well, do you have final thoughts?
I just, again, can't get over the fact that this film just works so well even today. I don't know why I'm so shocked by that, but that's the persistent thing that penetrates, and
Arguably, it works better today than it did then.
well, evidently. So, but yeah, I purchased this movie today when we watched it, but I'm glad I purchased it. I'll definitely be watching this one again in the future. So,
What would you rate it?
I would give this 8 out of 10 stars on the 10-star scale, and I would give this 3 out of 4 on the 4-star scale.
I would give this, I'd probably give it an 8 on the 10, and I'd give it 3.5. The big holdbacks for it is just, it is kind of slow, and it takes a little while to get going. Once he gets on the plane, though, I think that you're pretty well, on the edge of your seat. You're there with him.
Yeah.
And it does that really surprisingly effectively.
Yeah. This was nominated for 1 Oscar. It was nominated for Best Effects and Special Effects. But yeah, this is not... I can't say this is the best Billy Wilder film that I've seen, but it is certainly a fun film, and it's up there. It's good, and it's another classic checked off my list. So,
No.
What else do you want to say about this?
No, I think I've said what I have to say about it.
Do you think this was better on your first viewing, or the
I think it was
subsequent?
better on the first viewing.
You think so?
Because it's
It's
you've
so
not
fresh.
seen it before, and the energy of it, and like even when you kind of knew the story, you didn't really know a lot of the details. At least I didn't, and so there are those moments, which I had to a lesser extent here, where you're just like, oh, don't stop, what, no. But yeah, it's not as good, but it's still pretty darn good on repeat viewing.
Good. Well, I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. You have not provided me a sufficient outtake. Come on, you gotta... I'm used to having at least 3-minute outtakes.
It's like...
The pressure's on
It's like
me.
I've been up for 3 days, and I'm just not there.
You don't have some Jimmy Stewart rant you want to give me?
This is one of, I want to say 3 airplane movies, Jimmy Stewart airplane movies that I can think of. Can you name the others?
I don't think I can.
Well, actually, 4, because
Okay.
one of them is Airport 1977, in which terrorists attempt to steal all the art on Jimmy Stewart's big plane, so they crash it under the ocean, and it doesn't work out very well for them.
Yeah.
But a lot of the has-been actors make it out alive, thanks to Jack Lemmon. And then there's Flight of the Phoenix. You seen Flight of the Phoenix? They made a remake of it with, I want to say, Dennis Quaid in like 2006, which is But the original Flight of the Phoenix, which also has, I want to say, George Kennedy in it, is very good. They're on a plane, they crash the Sahara. How are they going to get out? How are they going to fix this plane, with very few tools? And it rises like a phoenix, and they're able to get out. And then the one that he made before this is a film called No Highway in the Sky, which I quite like. It's fairly forgotten, but Jimmy Stewart plays a widower with a young child who's an airplane designer, and he comes to realize that there is a defect in his new plane and that it has a high probability of crashing, and so he gets on one of the flights of this plane to try to stop the flight from going off, but when they won't stop the flight, it's like, well, I got to be on here to troubleshoot in an emergency situation. And then he meets Marlene Dietrich, who's on the flight. It's been a while since I've seen that one, but I remember thinking quite fondly of it.
Yeah.
So.
And what's the last one?
When push, those are this.
Oh, okay.
So when push goes to shove, I was able to take from my off-the-cuff vast amount of film knowledge and just do a spiel about Jimmy Stewart airplane movies for a couple
Well, I
minutes.
meant, I thought you were going to give me in character as Jimmy
Well,
Stewart.
not in character, Jimmy Stewart.
Some sort of rant as Jimmy Stewart, but that's okay.
We were joking before with your wife that, about how patient she was to let us record here. And I'm like, you're going to have to be even more patient because we're going to record a hair metal album. And I'm like, a hair metal album by Jimmy Stewart. That'd be something.
Leave it to you to come up with something like that. You'll have to fill her in on that later, so. Why don't you give me a little bit of levels?
We don't want them too high because if the levels are too high, a bunch of ice builds on the plane. Then you have to go back down low, so the ice falls
And
off.
turn around.
Yeah.
We have to go backwards, which
You
is a
have to
bad
turn around in
idea.
a circle for a few times to get a few winks, and then you wake up and you're in Ireland.
Yeah. Or off the coast of Ireland or something. Unless you have some sort of witty.
Well, I guess I might as well go.
I think my favorite was, "Shut your face, he's talking long distance." Or I'm the bigwig from St. Louis.
Yeah, the big week from St. Louis.
Yeah.